Welcome to Conversations from Stritch. Today's October 26, 2023. I'm Dr. David Livingston, and I'm joined by Dr. Christopher Sint. It is the first week of our second 8-week term at Lewis University, so the midpoint for most of our students and most of our classes. Before we begin today's show, I just want to take a moment and pause and reflect on the announcement that this morning we had another mass shooting in Maine last night, killing at least 18 people and wounding countless others. We've become way too familiar with these violent acts in our society over the last decade. It should remind us as a community to always be aware of our surroundings, and if you see something, say something. We want to offer our prayers to the families of those affected by this violence. We had the Peace Teach-In last week. It was a great success. Wrapped up last Thursday night with the DeGr Memorial Lecture featuring author Leah Thomas, who spoke and read from her book, The Intersectional Environmentalist. We had our biannual Board of Trustees retreat on Friday and Saturday in Chicago this last week. And on Saturday night, we had a Signum Fidei event at the House of Blues. We raised over $300,000 and honored Mary DeGr. The fundraising from this event goes to our most vulnerable students. You can see here on the screen, Mary, and it was really a pleasure. I know Chris and I really enjoyed having an opportunity to be with Mary, to be with her family, her husband, so many of her friends and colleagues, friends of ours and colleagues of ours from here at Lewis that were able to be with her and honor her. It was just a really, really great evening.
It was great seeing her. Signum Fidei is always really fun and special and powerful, but it was also Mary's job really for so many years was to distribute the mission fund, which is what Signum Fidei is all about, and so it was really wonderful to honor her in that context.
Yeah, because in past years we often honor somebody who gives to the fund.
Yeah,
and of course Mary is given to the fund as well. But to your point, to honor the kind of person at the heart of really working with these students and their families to try to get them through to graduation, it was just a really wonderful evening. And I just want to say publicly how grateful I am to everyone who worked on that. John Carey, John Kilpatrick, everybody in studio that created all the video, to Colleen Ahern, her whole advancement team, Julie Penner, the whole conference and events team. It's a real team effort to put something like this together. And of course, at the end of the day, to have more funds, $300,000 more to give to our most vulnerable students is key. This week, it's been a crazy couple weeks. On Monday, we celebrated the partnership with United Aviate, which is a United Airlines pilot career development program. Aviate now offers Lewis University student pilots and instructors a clear pathway to employment as a United captain. Throughout their journey, Aviate participants will receive coaching from United pilots, have opportunities to connect with members of the United team, and have access to and travel privileges that go along with joining the Aviate program. Participants also receive conditional job offers upon acceptance, eliminating that need for additional interviews with United through this Aviate partnership. As part of the event on Monday, we officially cut the ribbon, symbolizing the partnership, and United representatives and Lewis University alumni present, and they served on a pilot panel. So we had some of our alumni there, and it was really great to see some of our alumni from the past who are flying day in and day out, week in and week out for United, come back to campus. And I think for our students, what a great opportunity to meet some people who 10 years ago sat in their seats. I just thought it was a really great event.
Yeah, it was a great event and really amazing program.
Yeah.
And
I think we were both surprised.
It's almost not comprehensible to us, but the perk that you get when you're a United employee, which is that you can fly anywhere in the world for free, applies to our students.
With a friend.
And a friend when they get admitted into the Aviate program, which many of our students will. So
yeah. So some of our junior students now, I mean, I hope they're still going to keep studying, Chris, because when they can go to like California for the
vacations are
weekend
only
for
so
free
long.
with a friend,
Yeah.
hopefully they're. But anyway, it's an amazing program, and I will just say about this, we had actually Eric on last week talking about a different aviation partnership with Kristen and her students, but we've had aviation people on here before, and we've talked about how amazing the growth in need for pilots, aviation maintenance professionals, air traffic controllers is. But this just goes to how far a company's willing to go to give a future employee that's maybe 3 years out, 4 years out from flying with them, to give them that access to free travel around the globe is pretty amazing. Another great community hour happened this week. Yesterday, we had information sessions hosted by the Muslim Student Association that was very informative. We had other events, including a trivia hosted by the Black Student Union, trivia contest, a women's business panel, an Immigrants Day of Action, information table, and as always, mass esports and fun on the green. It was really, you and I mean, I will say these community hours have come to be a difficult day for me, to be honest, because there are like 7 things and you have to choose one of them. But I will say, you and I were both able to be at the Muslim Student Association presentation. They brought in an outside speaker. I thought he did a good job, and it was a really packed house.
Great
I mean,
speaker.
we didn't know this, and we never know which room to put people in, but standing room only for that event, which was great. I do want to say on another front, connected to internationalization, this afternoon we're hosting representatives from 2 international universities, the University of Salamanca in Spain and the University of Costa Rica. They are part of the delegation visiting local Chicago universities while they're here for the annual conference of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And I will say that this is, in part, not in whole, but in part, we are a HACU member, but our partnership with St. Augustine College has really helped push this. Dr. Reyes Gonzalez, who's been on this show before, is the host and taking them to a few Chicago universities, as we said. They'll take a tour of campus, they'll hear about Lewis. We'll engage in dialogue about potential collaborations that we might have with both of these universities, and so we're really looking forward to that. And that is just a bit of what's going on.
Yeah,
and Chris, you have a whole bunch of news. I feel like we could stop there, but you have a whole host of things that have been going on in our faculty and staff.
It is a really busy time, and I really look forward to this afternoon and meeting those representatives from Salamanca and Costa Rica. So some news. Congratulations to Dr. Arvi Vitente, our program director and professor of physical therapy and director of the physical therapy program, who was formally inducted as the secretary of the Clinical Education Commission under the American Council of Academic Physical Therapy during their conference on October 13th in Philadelphia. The primary mission of the Clinical Education Commission is to advance ACAPS, that's the abbreviation for the accreditor, goals by cultivating a culture of excellence in clinical education for physical therapy professionals. Congratulations to Dr. Julia Koklas, who recently shared her expertise in 2 different ways. The assistant professor of nursing co-authored an article called APRN's Perception of Telehealth Use, which was published in the October edition of the Nurse Practitioner. And Dr. Koklas also presented a presentation called APRN Telehealth Satisfaction Survey, a descriptive study at the Illinois Society for Advanced Practice Nursing's Midwest Conference on October 4th and 7th. Dr. Mark Schultz, professor of history, was asked to sign on to a U.S. Supreme Court amicus brief for a case called Alexander versus South Carolina State Conference of the NAACP. The case is currently before the Supreme Court. It argues that the state legislature of South Carolina violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution by enacting racial gerrymandering in the way that they withdrew South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. In January of this year, the ACLU won a decision before the district court in South Carolina, and the case was appealed to the Supreme Court. So the brief that Mark signed on to is a statement on behalf of historians across the country whose research addresses the long history of disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South. So it was great that he could contribute to that, and that the work of historians is being represented in the Supreme Court discussion. It principally argues that redistricting has been a weapon for preserving white privilege in South Carolina from Reconstruction until the current proposed congressional district map of South Carolina, drawing a couple of years ago. A reminder that the Wadsworth Gallery is currently featuring work by Rosie Petrie, a multidisciplinary artist fusing portraiture and storytelling as an active witness. She's been an artist in residence at Bell Hooks Center and Feister Hotel, a Knoll Emerging Artist Fellow, and Mildred Harpole Artist of the Year. Her work is on view through today, when the gallery will host a closing reception and gallery talk from 7 to 9. So it's your last chance to see that show, and also come tonight to see to meet her and listen to her talk a little bit about her work. Before going to the calendar, I wanted to just mention 2 pieces of athletic news. First, the men's and women's cross-country teams each won the Great Lakes Valley Conference Championship last weekend at the GLVC Championships. We're looking at the women here. That was their 5th title and 2nd GLV championship in a row. The men's team recorded its 16th GLVC championship title. So congratulations to both our men's and women's teams, and to Coach Kearney and the whole track and cross country coaching staff for another amazing season. They will compete not this weekend, but next weekend in the NCAA Midwest Regional Championships in Evansville. And then second, we have some bittersweet news. I sent out an email to the community just about an hour ago or 2 hours ago that our longtime athletic director, Dr. John Planick, will be leaving Lewis to take a position as athletic director at Dominican University, effective in the middle of next week. For 12 years, Dr. Planick's leadership, under Dr. Planick's leadership, Flyer Athletics has achieved tremendous success, including 5 teams advancing to the Final Four with a national final appearance in men's volleyball. Women's basketball reached the Elite 8 one time during his tenure. Women's volleyball appeared in 10 NCAA tournaments. Women's basketball appeared in 9 NCAA tournaments. Men's basketball in 4. And just last season, in the 2022-23 season, Lewis University won the Great Lakes Valley Conference Commissioner's Cup for the best overall performance in the conference's core sports. Beyond success, and we've talked about this so much together on the show, the Flyer student athletes achieved really historic success in the classroom during their term. 299 Lewis University student athletes selected in the as academic all Great Lakes Valley Conference team last year. 36 student athletes had a 4.0 grade point average, and Lewis University Athletics received the President's Award for Academic Excellence consecutively from 2016 to 2022. So amazing achievements for Dr. Planick. He's had a huge impact on our community altogether, and he was a really powerful community member, as well as a highly influential leader in the national NCAA Division II athletics and beyond. National search will be conducted soon for a permanent replacement, and while the search is conducted, Lewis will have interim co-athletic directors, Jen Jensick, who is currently the associate director and head athletic trainer, as well as the senior woman officer representing us with the GLVC, and Ed Schaefer, associate director for compliance. I look forward to the search getting underway and for working with Jen and Ed as we move forward with athletics. So a lot going on this week. There's a lot of costumes in your calendar report.
There are a lot of costumes on the calendar of events that I want to talk about. I do want to just make a couple comments. One, losing John. I mean, anytime it's part of being in leadership is losing really good people, because sometimes you prepare people they end up getting great opportunities. So it is, as you said, I think the word used at the beginning is bittersweet. It is bittersweet for us to have John move on. He's been a great leader. He's, a lot of wisdom. He has a lot of experience, and we'll really miss him. It is a great start to the year. I just want to, we won the Commissioner Cup last year, but the All Sports Trophy, we were just a few points short of you, Indy.
Yes.
So I'm just saying
Thanks
we're 2 of 2.
Thanks for bringing that up.
We're 2 of 2 so far on winning GLVC championships, and we want to continue that momentum.
These are the first ones, yeah.
So I think that's awesome. So we do have some events to talk about. We have a list of them that'll be up here in a second. A Halloween party by the Sustainability Club. We have an open mic night tonight. I mean, if I were recommending an evening for some of you, I would go over to the Rosie Petrie exhibit tonight, listen to her talk, and then run over and do your kind of poetry at the open mic night over in Lockport at Lock and Mule. Just a great opportunity for a fun evening on campus and off campus and in the arts space.
I think you could get the Flyer Fan Fest in there if you
Oh,
were.
and you could, you could run to the Flyer. You could probably do, the kind
Maybe.
of 7 to 7:45, then run over to the Flyer Fan Fest, and then wrap up your night over in Lockport at Lock and Mule. Be a fun night. Sometimes I hear people say, there's nothing to do on campus. I'm like, seriously, tonight you can just have fun all night. So that's exciting. Men's and women's soccer hosting Illinois Springfield. I will say that this weekend for the soccer teams, especially for the men's team, big game on Friday night because these are the 2 of the top teams in the GLVC, and I just think it's going to be a really awesome contest tomorrow night. And I'm hoping that it's not pouring rain because they will play it in the pouring rain. It's just a much better game when it's not as sloppy as it can be. Couple other things, upcoming events. We got a spooktacular happening. As you said, there's a lot of Halloween costumes. There's a Halloween dance next week. Habitat for Humanity has a build day. So recommend, signing up for that. I think that'll be really fun. And then we have Quincy on Sunday, Mass. And of course, we're also a little lecture on Puerto Rican Chicago, 1946 to 1994. There's also some travel for athletics that's coming up, but we do have other socials that are on here. And just a reminder that Community Hour next week, we have a lot going on. There will be trick-or-treating next week on Tuesday, so wander over to the LRC and get some candy to keep you awake in your afternoon classes. That's worth doing. And then we have some travel, I think, for Flyer sports travel. So men's and women's golf, they'll be gone at the Invite over in Kentucky this weekend. Women's and men's swimming will compete against IIT on Saturday. Women's basketball plays a preseason game at DePaul. Those are fun. Sometimes the score is not exactly what we want. I've been to a few of those events, but still fun to see them play. And then women's volleyball will travel to Maryville and Missouri S&T. A couple big games for them. So a lot going on and off campus. And, we always just remind people you can both, we love when people attend and get in and give our athletes, student athletes, as well as our student open mic poets, give them your support. But then on the other side, get onto your iPad or onto your device and watch our athletes that are traveling so you can wish them well or congratulate them on Monday or Tuesday in class. So, Chris, we have an amazing guest tonight. I'm excited because we were able to have an opportunity to hear some of this a few weeks ago and then wanted to bring our guest onto the show.
Yeah, that's true. I'm really excited to introduce our guest, and as always, before I do that, a reminder that you can ask questions during the conversation at askus@lewisu.edu, and we will get those questions through to our guest or into our conversation. And again, if you are watching a recorded version of this, you may also use that email, and we can forward the email to our guest or try to get the question answered regardless of what it is about. So I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Jamil Mustafa, who earned his PhD in English from the University of Chicago. He's a professor in our English Studies department, a former department chair, former director of the Scholars Academy. He's published widely in the fields of Victorian literature, film studies, and Gothic literature, and his research has been supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And he's also hosted major conferences at Lewis for the International Gothic Association and the Honors Council for the Illinois region. Earlier this year, the University of Wales published his book, The Blaxploitation Horror Film, which we just saw the cover of a second ago, comparative analysis of how mainstream and blaxploitation horror films interpret and adapt classic Gothic tales. Jamil, welcome. Great to have you here with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks
And
for inviting
as
me.
Dr. Livingston said, we saw it was actually a community time event hosted by COFAC. We saw you speak about your book just a few weeks ago to a very large crowd of Arts and Ideas students, and it was so wonderful. So we're really happy to get to talk a little bit more with you and follow up on the work. So I guess the first question is for you is just maybe talk a little bit about what you teach or what you are expert in terms of your the longer term span of your career and how it led to this interest that came out in this book, or led to the ideas behind this book.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I did my graduate work at the University of Chicago, and I chose Chicago in part because there was a man there, William Veeder, who specialized in Gothic fiction, literature, culture. And he was terrific. He was terrific. And so early on, I was trained as a Victorianist, so I studied 19th century British literature. And so that, I guess, if I had to be pegged into a box, that would be the box, the Victorianist. But I was always interested in the Gothic aspects of Victorian literature and culture, and the Victorian Gothic flourishes. I mean, the most famous Gothic texts probably are Victorian, right? So Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde. Frankenstein is romantic, but it's still 19th century, So that was my training, and when I was at Chicago, I took a course on the horror film, and that interested me a great deal, and I thought, someday it might be interesting to teach such a class. And so fast forward, a couple decades, and I was watching actually some blaxploitation horror films, and I think the first one I saw, I was familiar, I believe, with Blackula. I think I'd already seen Blackula, but I was watching actually Sugar Hill, which is one about zombies. And I thought afterwards, this is a really fun movie. I really enjoyed this movie, and I'd love to look at the research that's been done on it. And I'm sure there's plenty out there. Yeah. And as it happened, there was very little. So there's plenty on blaxploitation films. There are whole books on blaxploitation films. Right. There's plenty on horror movies, right? Whole books on horror movies. There are maybe bits of chapters in books on horror movies about blaxploitation horror, and likewise, books on blaxploitation might have a chapter on blaxploitation horror. But there was no monograph, there was no full-length book, which surprised me. There was a really excellent essay by a man named Harry Benshoff, and he surveyed blaxploitation horror in a way that I hadn't seen other people do. So I thought to myself, all right, well, I was sort of hoping to read a book on this topic, but Toni Morrison's advice. I mentioned this at the presentation. If there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written, you have to write it. I'm paraphrasing Toni Morrison, but so I figured, well, let's give it a shot. And I think what I brought to this project was a background in Victorian studies and in the Gothic. It seems to me that typically people who write on blaxploitation films, they're experts in film.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I have some training in that area, but I wouldn't call myself necessarily an expert. So I think I brought something to the party that was a little bit different from what others.
So Jamil, can I just ask you, maybe we can back this up a little bit because of those last two comments and something you started with. So, the subtitle, Adaptation and Appropriation and the Gothic. So could you just talk about some of the characteristics of the Gothic? Like just what makes Gothic Gothic, I guess, for those of our viewers who haven't taken your class, but might want to take your class in the future. So this can be a plug for what makes that up? Or some of us probably have this sense of it, but it probably has to do with mist and castles and somebody like that's not, a little creepy for us, but there are characteristics of this that this is your expertise, is the Gothic, right? Not necessarily the film piece, though you know enough about that, way more than I do. But could you give us a little like primer on, and I mean, short version of what that means?
Yeah, you're wise to qualify the short version. Technically, let's see. First of all, there's Gothic architecture. So they're the cathedrals, Notre Dame, for example. So, there is that kind of Gothic. And the root is the same. So Gothic comes from Visigoths, so the Visigoths attacking Rome and so forth. So it's kind of synonymous with barbarity, barbarism, primitivism, and so forth. But then you have the cathedrals. So setting those aside, in terms of literature, it starts in the late 18th century as a kind of reaction to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason, and neoclassical literature, which is very balanced and formal and so forth. So the Gothic sort of celebrates imbalance and chaos and darkness and so forth. So in the 18th century, late 1700s, there are some famous novels by a woman named Anne Radcliffe, and she writes The Mysteries of Udolpho and The Italian, for example. There's another guy, Matthew Lewis, who came to be known as Monk Lewis after his novel The Monk. And that's a wild ride. I won't spoil it for you. I should also warn you, since we're at a Catholic institution, that these 18th century Gothic novels are rabidly anti-Catholic, sure. Right? So they're in Britain, and there's a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment in the 18th century in Britain, and so that's reflected in these monstrous monks. And
did Jane Austen write a Gothic novel around the same decade? 1790s.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah,
sorry.
so
I'm sitting here with these two English scholars. Yeah. I'm like an ignorant, I can get into the anti-Catholic because that's my not being anti-Catholic, but right. I understand anti-Catholic.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah. She writes a book called Northanger Abbey, and this is tricky because people sometimes characterize Northanger Abbey as an anti-Gothic or a parody of the Gothic.
Yeah, right.
Feminist scholars have argued that it is, in fact, a Gothic novel. Now, that's debatable. So where you draw the line, what is and what isn't a Gothic novel, it's somewhat debatable.
But it was a genre during that decade, to the point where somebody like Jane Austen is messing around
playing with it. Playing in that space, in that sandbox. So right. I'm interested in, we're probably going to go over several different things, but in terms of kind of weaving back and forth. I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I love the way you said it, and I'm disappointed that I didn't remember. But the celebration kind of the chaotic, the grotesque, that kind of, how do students react to that? Because that's an interesting thing to me. It feels like it's very 21st century. That there's, and of course, for some students, they're like, there's the goth, right? They have this, this sense of, they have their own sense of what that means. So I'm just interested in, as you begin to explore this, how your students, what is their reaction as you describe it on this, I guess, theory level, and how they because that's an interesting thing. Why would somebody celebrate this, right? And I know it's a somewhat reactionary, but then it gets raised up still, right?
Well, that isn't all it is, of course.
Sure.
But and I'm glad you pointed out the Goths. So, what I've described sounds a bit dry, perhaps, late 18th century novels, but believe me, this one, The Monk by Matthew Lewis, is anything but. So I do share with students a sort of list of characteristics of the Gothic. So you've already kind of touched on a couple of them. One is setting, so the haunted house, the haunted castle. One is character, so you have a villain who often pursues a heroine through said haunted house or haunted castle. There's a strong sort of sexual undercurrent to that pursuit. Sometimes there can be a supernatural element to it, so demons, devils, ghosts, things like that. Doesn't have to be, but it can be. But the irrational is there. Back to your original point, and I think students, they're very familiar with this. They've seen horror movies. They're very comfortable with these topics, and the Goths are a sort of subculture that celebrates this particular kind of approach to horror. And also, of course, now this is this other term, horror. So how do horror and the Gothic relate to one another? And that's a complicated question too.
Yeah.
But the Goths tend to, if you see the way they dress, on the one hand, and this goes to your point about sort of old things and new things, on the one hand, they're dressing as if they were in the Romantic period. Do you know what I mean? In the sort of early 19th century,
Right.
And they've got outfits that kind of call to mind, say, Percy Shelley or someone of that sort. And on the other hand, of course, it's a very modern phenomenon, and it's been going on for quite a long time, and seems to speak to our current moment. Do you know?
Yeah.
So the Gothic always does engage with culture. Actually, I'm glad you asked this question, because it isn't just a reaction to something else. It is a response to particularly anxieties within the culture, and not only a response to those, but also a way of enabling people to work through their anxieties about these things, right? And that was true, in the 1700s when it first appeared, and I think it's true today.
Yeah.
Do you know, we always have anxieties.
Sure.
So I want to ask about another word in the subtitle, adaptation.
Right.
So that seems to be the way you described it earlier, what you're bringing to this work of all these, of the Gothic, of film studies and blaxploitation is studying the way these films they're mostly from the 70s, are interpreting 19th century actual books from the 19th century, or those characteristics of the genre of the Gothic from the 19th century.
Right, so we always have to have subtitles. So mine is Adaptation, Appropriation, and the Gothic. And
We won't ask you about all the words.
Well, the words. Well, we talked about
We've done
talked
two.
about Gothic, so that's
Let's
good.
see if we can get off right now.
Well, the adaptation and appropriation, you might ask, well, what's the relationship between them? And just simply put, I mean, we're familiar with adaptations, right? So for example, you read Frankenstein and you go to the movies and you watch, whatever version of Frankenstein, you see the James Whale 1931 or the Kenneth Branagh more recently or something like that. So those are adaptations, film adaptations. I mean, there was a play adaptation of Frankenstein not long after actually Mary Shelley published the novel. So that's pretty straightforward adaptation. Now, adaptations can be kind of loose, so they can play around a lot with the source material. They can be closer to the source material. Think like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. Those are pretty close. But they vary. Now, appropriation is a different thing. So appropriation happens when a creator takes source material but radically changes it, right? Radically changes it. Particularly, the fancy word is proximization, but it brings the material into the present. So yes, these movies are from the 1970s, but the figures, 19th century figures for the most part that I'm dealing with. And so the question is, let me start with the thesis. My thesis is that whereas films like James Whale's Frankenstein or Todd Browning's Dracula adapt these source texts from the 19th century, blaxploitation films appropriate them. So they take these storylines, they take these characters, and they do something radically new with these old materials. So I'm basically triangulating. So each chapter deals with the original source material, and then I move to the generally the early 20th century adaptations, like I mentioned, Frankenstein, Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, and then go to the blaxploitation films of the 70s.
Right. So can we just, because I worry we're running out of time, and we haven't even talked about blaxploitation.
Okay.
So can I have you? There are some in our audience that are going to be like, we're saying it too fast. What are you even talking about, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you could just talk about it as a genre.
Yeah.
I mean, you did a great job when we were at Community Hour of kind of laying this out. What is this genre? What was going on? What was it a reaction to? How did it appropriate? So maybe you could just give a little bit on blaxploitation.
And maybe just use, if I may, use one film as an example.
If you want to use one.
Because that would be where we'd go next.
All right. Actually, this is very appropriate because Richard Roundtree just passed away.
Oh,
I don't know if you know who Richard Roundtree is or was. So Richard Roundtree starred in a movie called Shaft.
Oh, yeah.
And-
No, I
yeah.
did see this.
Right, yeah.
It didn't click, but I did read that in the Times, yeah.
So blaxploitation movies, they emerged in the early 70s, and the term dates from 1972. And it was a negative term. It was used by a man named Junius Griffin, who was associated with the NAACP. And the reason he didn't like these films, blaxploitation is a portmanteau term, so it's exploitation combined with like black exploitation. And exploitation movies are around since the 50s, and basically they were low-budget movies, and they capitalized on topics of interest, in the day, right? So they're very current and maybe controversial, ideally, right? So he didn't like these because he felt they were exploiting the black community. So that sort of shifts the meaning of the word exploitation a little bit, because you have to ask, well, what or whom is being exploited?
Right.
So the reason he and others didn't like these films was you would see sometimes pimps, you'd see drug pushers, you'd see gangsters, right? And they felt this is the era of civil rights, right? So these are not good representations of African Americans, right? They're not positive. And so there was a lot of criticism of the blaxploitation films. On the other hand, you had people like Shaft, who's a detective, right? So he's fighting the mob in his town, right? So not all of these characters were, as I said, gangsters or criminals. Some of them were members of the police force. Some of them I talk about in the horror movies, scientists, So it's a very complicated picture, and but overall, that's what they were. They were very popular. Hollywood was in a lot of trouble in the 1960s. The box office revenues were down. And so blaxploitation movies sort of arguably saved Hollywood, frankly.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they lasted until the late 70s, and then they kind of, petered out after that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because part of what you're saying is that there's which I think is ongoing, and we're struggling with literally, today over some issues about trying to caricature or pick a population and put them in this box that everybody, we want to say something about them, and oftentimes it's a negative stereotype, but we get to quote unquote sell tickets for it. People want to go see it, and so I think I think your book, and I haven't gotten to reading the book, but I really enjoyed the longer version of this, last month. Helps us to understand this in a deeper way. And I guess I'm interested, because I think you said some of this. We had a question that came in about, where this lies in terms of your expertise. Like, would you call yourself an expert on this specific area, or is it, somewhat tangential to what you consider your main expertise? And will this move your now I want this to become, or was it like, I want to go there and then I want to get back to my, because as scholars, we all have our there's a core, and then there's these places we can go. So could you talk a little bit about your own maybe professional journey in terms of your scholarship, and maybe where it might go next?
Sure. So I'm a little bit of a dilettante, and probably professionally this is not the wisest trajectory, but it's the one I've taken. So what happens is I get interested in something, because sometimes people focus very narrowly in one area, and their whole careers are books about this.
I think that's what our viewer wanted to know.
Yeah. And so no, I think, oh, well, look, nobody's written this thing on Ray Bradbury, so let me do that. Oh, look, Shirley Jackson, So it's sort of, it's all generally within the world of the Gothic. But honestly, I'll confess, I've sort of moved away from my focus on the Victorian. Now I'm going to move back in a minute to that, but I have moved in some ways kind of far afield from that, although I'm still working with Victorian texts. So this was scary for me, because I know a good deal about the source material. I knew the Gothic novels, and I knew the mainstream films. I didn't know a lot about the 1970s. I had to learn all kinds of things. The book deals with Vietnam. It deals with medical experimentation. It deals with the death penalty, the racial implications of the death penalty. It deals with the Black Panthers, right? Civil rights movement, gay rights movement, feminist movement. It's a lot. And these movies are engaging with all of these issues in very complex ways, by the way. So one thing I wanted one point I'd like to make is that people, I think, one reason maybe this book wasn't written earlier, and they've been around for decades and decades, is because I think they're sort of doubly marginalized, right? So they're blaxploitation movies, so that puts them in one bucket, and they're horror movies, and so they're in this other bucket. And I think that's one of the reasons why people haven't attended to them. So it is a bit out of my wheelhouse. The close reading of the films, I'm comfortable doing that. But again, the research into the period, I had to do a bit of that. But again, what I think I bring to the discussion is a pretty deep knowledge of the Victorian texts. And then I'm looking at the other materials, to some extent through that lens, although they're really in conversation. I want to emphasize that. And some of the most interesting work had to do with the way the blaxploitation movies relate to the original Victorian texts.
Yeah.
People don't talk about that at all. But in some ways, they're closer in their relationship than the mainstream so-called adaptations are.
And that's why I was asking you about adaptation, because it is actually a super complex.
Yes.
Yes.
This is a whole field of literary and
whole
film
field
study.
of study.
Okay, I'm going to take control
Yeah,
of time.
go ahead. You take, because
So
we got
I'm going to make
4
a
or 5
point,
minutes.
ask some rapid fire questions, and then, because there's some other area, and we're not close to being done, I just want to take control.
Okay.
I love this. This
So
is what
first
we
of
do.
all-
I love this. 4 years in, and I get to take control. Go ahead.
Okay,
I love
so
this.
first
Go
of
ahead.
all, I just want to reiterate something that Jamil said. He just said it, and he said it at the beginning, because you and I always talk about with different groups, like what scholarship is and what research is, and one of the catchphrases we use is, it's actually making new knowledge. It's figuring out something that has never been known before. It could be science, it could be social research, but in this case, I just love the way you talked about not figuring out that nobody had deeply studied this connection between these different points, and we don't have to talk more about that, but I think it's such a great description of the way scholars think and work, and what we're asked students to do when they are writing scholarly papers or doing research in the lab and so on. So I just wanted to say that. We don't have time to go deeply into anything, but a question came in about, and we hadn't really talked about any of the actual films, in the book. So just if somebody was just going to dip their toe in this and watch one film that's featured in the book, what would you recommend?
And could I just put a qualifier on that? That might be available for them.
Yeah,
right?
good
Not,
point.
not something that they have to go buy a disc from and search all over the place. But
Yeah, right, good
if there were
point.
one film that they, like this weekend, if you had 2 hours, which one would you watch?
Well, it's Halloween, so it's appropriate. I would definitely say Blackula.
Yeah,
Blackula.
that's what I figured you were going to say.
It's probably the best, arguably, of the films, and it's very accessible. It's very interesting. And William Marshall, who plays the titular character, he's really was a terrific actor, very accomplished. So definitely Blackula.
All right, Blackula
Thank
is our
you so
vote.
much.
Yeah.
And then I want to ask a question about the relationship between teaching and scholarship. So, you've been very productive in your career, been here at Lewis a long time teaching, and I'm just wondering, what is the relationship? Because I think sometimes people who don't do scholarship think, well, I teach this set of classes over here, and then I get a break from doing that, and I go away over here, whatever here is, and write this book that's based on the 19th century and the Gothic, and I guess I'm suggesting that I think I know that they're more closely connected. And so I just wonder if you agree with that, or how does one thing feed the other and vice versa?
Yeah, I think it's easy to separate them, partly because people do a lot of scholarly work in the summers when they're not teaching, But I think that's a mistake, particularly at an institution like Lewis. You really, I think you're wise to the extent that you can integrate your scholarship in your teaching. That's a good strategy at a teaching-oriented institution. I teach courses in the Gothic. I teach courses. One horror fiction and film deals with adaptation. There are courses students can take where we actually look at and study the blaxploitation horror films, for example. So to some extent, when I was working on this, I would share these films with students and get their reactions, and then think about their reactions. So that can feed the scholarship, so to speak. You can work with the students on it. But I think more important than that is modeling scholarship for students, so sharing with them the fact that I am writing too, right? So you're working on your papers, I'm working on something too, and I struggle just as you struggle, to some extent we're sort of all in it together, more or less. And in the English Studies department, as elsewhere at Lewis, we have a lot of opportunities for students to become themselves scholars, right? So you mentioned the International Gothic Association conference. So I had students and even alumni who came back. And some of them were in an advanced study class that I was doing on the Gothic novel. And they helped me to run the conference, and they presented a panel of papers at the conference in front of the most distinguished Gothic scholars in the world, right? And they didn't know that when they were presenting the papers. And afterward, I said, once everybody left, I said, oh, by the way, David Punter was in the audience, and they knew who David Punter was from our class. So there are opportunities here, and ideally, it's not just a matter of me sort of drawing from the students, but modeling for them and engaging them in their own scholarship, so that they can present on the Gothic, for example, at this conference, at the Celebration of Scholarship, or at the IGA, or wherever.
Yeah, it's great, wonderful, and I love what you said about how they have ideas that you have not had, or that makes, something a student says in the classroom makes you think about it slightly differently, and then your brain starts going, and it leads to very positive outcomes. Almost every week, I don't think we did it today, but I feel like every week we announce student scholarship, so I just love that about Lewis, that there's so many professors who help undergraduate students as well as graduate students do scholarly work, and to be able to present them in front of other audiences. I think the last questions we have are about the major. Oh, first of all, about taking a class with you. Are these classes in the major, or if you're a major of another, if you're a student in another major, can they take the Gothic class? And I don't know how that. Just talk about how it works, or who the class is for.
Well, one advantage of the English Studies curriculum is that almost all of our courses satisfy the general education requirement in literature. Yes, the courses that I offer in the Gothic and in film certainly would satisfy that requirement. So even if you're not an English Studies major, why not take a course in the Gothic, or horror fiction in film, or the horror film? And we've got a few different options for students who are interested. So absolutely, yeah, they're very welcome.
And then could you tell us a little bit about the major itself? And
Sure. So we're a little bit misunderstood, I think. So we call ourselves English Studies because it's a wide-ranging major. So we've got 3 different concentrations, one of them in creative and professional writing, one of them in literature and language, and one of them in basically teaching English in the schools. And I think people don't always understand that the kind of work that I'm doing in this book is the work that we do, right? So we have, I think you mentioned, poetry readings, which are great, and that's part of what we do as well. But we also do this kind of work, and we also do in our writing program work that honestly is social science work, right? There's some quantitative approaches involved too, and I think people would be very surprised to see what Dr. McNamara, for example, is doing in his
You're
field.
talking about like professional writing, technical writing, as well as writing for professional purposes.
Yes, but even beyond that, I mean, he does. Dr. McNamara does. It's social science almost, really, is what I'm getting.
It's that
at.
data side of the liberal arts, or especially like in English studies. There's that data. There's that interesting data side of that that is there.
Okay.
So I want to close with last questions for you. You're done.
Yes.
All right.
And film studies.
And film studies.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just want to, there was a comment that you made at the presentation last month that I guess, maybe just a very brief comment from you, but you just mentioned that you're in some sense modeling for students, but you mentioned in the talk last month that you wrote every day because you kind of figured out I don't remember what the word, 80,000 words or something, and I need to do 500 a day or something like that. I'm not remembering this exactly, but something like that. Writing is a craft, a practice, and I think what so many of our students, it doesn't matter whether they're English studies or anything, there's so many of them that get an assignment on the first week and don't do something till the 13th week, when in fact, really good scholarship, if they want to really do great scholarship, they would ideally write a little bit every day and keep crafting it, keep modifying it, keep editing it, making it better. Because you learn by writing, or at least my experience is you learn by writing. So I don't know if you have any comments on that, but because that's another way that I don't know if you talk about that in your class, but that's a modeling behavior. Like in order for me to get this to where it is, I need to write every day. Because by writing every day, I become a better writer. Whereas if I write, if some people, and I do think this is what some people do, they write sometimes for 2 weeks a year out of 30 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then they think that they're going to be great writers. And then when they get a mediocre grade, they're like, but I spent a lot of time on this, quote unquote. But you can't become good at anything if you don't practice it. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I would just say I've talked to people who are very productive scholars, and they all approach it as you've described, right? So just do a little bit every day, and it's demystified, right? Whereas if you say, okay, I'm going to do my scholarship in the summer, I mean, then the summer comes around and you think, oh no, it's time for scholarship. It's too much of a transition. It's too jolting. So yeah, I knew though too, I needed a deadline for this book, so I had the contract ahead of time, and I'd signed the contract, 85 to 90,000 words, due by this date, right? And that was it. I'd signed it, so I knew, all right, well, if I'm going to meet the terms of the contract, I'm going to have to produce, as it happened, I did the math, 500 words a day. So I sat down, I did 500 words a day. When the 500 words a day were done, I thought, all right, I've done my job. And I could feel good without, thinking about the whole project, which was much too daunting.
75,000 more words that you haven't written.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Right.
yes, my advice to students would be rather, who's going to take this advice? But my advice would still be, break up the projects. Break up the projects. Don't try to do everything, at once. Do a little bit every day, and you'll feel much better. But not only will you become a better writer, but your stress level will be reduced.
Which makes you a better writer.
Yes, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So practice, just like anything.
Well, Jamil, it's just been a pleasure to have you
Thank
on
you
the
so
show.
much.
Just really have enjoyed the conversation. It's very fun to spend some time really digging into scholarship. So I really appreciate both the book, your work with our students, your leadership on campus, and of course the conversation today. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll have to wrap up the show. I want to wish everybody on campus just a wonderful rest of the week. A reminder, we have lots of things to do over the weekend. So starting tonight and for the next 4 days, and always, but next 4 days, there's lots to do. So many blessings to you and those that you love.